Commander Tail stood on the observation deck of his flagship and watched the human vessel approach. The ship was called the Indomitable, and it looked like something a child had built from scrap metal. Ugly, blocky, nothing like the smooth, elegant curves of warships. Tail made a sound of disappointment through his throat slits. "That is our reinforcement," asked his lieutenant. "The Galactic Council sends us these creatures." Tail had read the files on humans. They came from a small blue planet at the edge of the galaxy. They had only discovered space travel 200 years ago. They were soft, weak, and broke easily. Their bones snapped like dry branches. Their skin tore like wet paper. They needed to breathe a specific mixture of gases or they died. They needed water every few hours or they died. They needed sleep every single day or their minds stopped working properly. Everything about humans seemed designed for dying. "The Council believes they will be useful," Tail said. He did not believe it himself, but orders were orders. They were the greatest warriors in the known galaxy. They stood 8 feet tall. Their bodies were covered in natural armor that could stop most projectile weapons. They had 4 arms, each one strong enough to crush stone. Their eyes could see in complete darkness. They could survive in the vacuum of space for short periods. They healed from wounds that would kill other species. Most importantly, they felt no fear. The gland that produced fear chemicals had stopped working in their species thousands of years ago. They had evolved beyond such weakness. Fear was for prey animals, were predators. The human shuttle docked with Tail's ship an hour later. He went to meet them personally, more out of curiosity than respect. He wanted to see these famous humans with his own eyes. The airlock opened, and Tail felt his first surprise. They were so small. The human commander barely reached his chest. She was a female named, with black hair cut short and dark eyes that looked up at him without any sign of being impressed by his size. Behind her stood perhaps 20 other humans, all of them tiny, all of them soft and pink and fragile-looking. "Commander Tail," said. Her voice was calm and clear. "Thank you for having us aboard. My team is ready to begin integration with your forces immediately." Tail looked down at her, way down. "You are the commander, you personally will be fighting." "Of course." "You are," he searched for a polite word, "small." Smiled, it was a strange expression, did not smile. "Size isn't everything, Commander." The man standing beside her laughed. This was her second in command. He was slightly taller than but still laughably short by standards. He had an easy, relaxed way of standing that seemed wrong for a soldier about to enter a war zone. "Don't worry about us," said. "We're tougher than we look." Tail doubted this very much, but he kept his thoughts to himself. He led the humans to the briefing room, where holographic displays showed the battlefield they would soon be fighting on. Nexus 7, a space station the size of a small moon, built at the intersection of 3 major trade routes. It had been home to 50 million beings before the Hollow came. Now it was a graveyard filled with shadows and screaming. "The Hollow took Nexus 7 6 months ago," Tail explained, activating the display. "They have been using it as a staging ground to attack nearby systems. Our mission is to take it back." "What do we know about the Hollow?" asked. She was studying the display with sharp, focused eyes. "Very little. They come from somewhere outside normal space. They cannot be reasoned with. They cannot be frightened. They exist only to consume. Matter, energy, life, thought itself, they devour everything." Weaknesses. Concentrated energy weapons can disrupt their physical forms, but they reform quickly. The only way to truly destroy them is to collapse the rifts they use to enter our dimension. Nodded slowly. "How many of them are we expecting?" "Our estimates suggest between 15 and 20,000 manifestations." One of the humans behind made a small sound. Tail checked his translator to make sure he had understood correctly. Yes. The human had whispered a curse word. "And how many troops do we have?" asked. "Combined forces, approximately 8,000. 3,000, 2,000 warriors, 1,000 crystalline soldiers, 500 Delphine aquatic specialists. Tail paused. And 300 humans. Silence filled the room. Broke it with another laugh. Well, we've had worse odds. Tail stared at him. You have faced worse odds than this. Once or twice. This was either a lie or these humans were completely insane. Possibly both. Over the next 3 days, Tail observed the human soldiers as they prepared for battle. He expected to see fear. He expected nervous movements, shaking hands, wide eyes. The biological signs of terror that he had seen in so many other species before combat. He saw none of these things. The humans checked their weapons with steady hands. They ran combat drills with focus and precision. They laughed and joked with each other, sharing meals and stories. One soldier, a young woman named, even sang while she cleaned her rifle. They do not seem afraid, Tail said too. Perhaps they are too stupid to understand the danger, suggested. Tail was not sure. There was something in the humans' eyes when they looked at the tactical displays, something dark and knowing. They understood exactly what they were walking into. They just did not seem to care. On the night before the assault, Tail found Commander alone on the observation deck. She was staring out at the stars, her small hands clasped behind her back. You should be sleeping, Tail said. So should you. Do not require as much sleep as humans. Nodded but did not look at him. I was thinking about my soldiers. Some of them won't come back tomorrow. This is war. Death is expected. Expected, yes, but never acceptable. She finally turned to face him. Every single one of them volunteered for this mission, Commander. They knew the odds. They came anyway. Why? Was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was soft. Because someone has to stand between the darkness and everyone else. That's what humans do. We stand. Tail did not understand, but he was beginning to suspect that humans were not as simple as he had believed. Tomorrow would show him the truth. The assault on Nexus 7 began at exactly 0600 hours, station time. Tail led his shock troops through the eastern airlock while the humans pushed through the western approach. The plan was simple. 2 forces would sweep toward the center of the station, clearing hollow manifestations as they went, until they reached the main rift generator and destroyed it. Simple plans rarely survived contact with the enemy. The moment Tail's forces breached the station, the darkness came alive. The hollow did not look like any living thing. They were shadows with weight, emptiness given form. They moved like smoke but hit like hammers. Where they touched, matter simply ceased to exist. Tail raised his plasma rifle and fired. The shot tore through the first hollow, scattering its form into wisps of black mist. But already it was reforming, pulling itself back together like water flowing uphill. Concentrated fire, Tail ordered. Do not let them reform. His moved with perfect precision. They had trained for this their entire lives. They felt no fear, no hesitation, no doubt. They were living weapons and they performed exactly as designed. In the first hour, Tail's force advanced 300 meters and destroyed approximately 200 hollow manifestations. Acceptable progress. He checked the tactical display to see how the humans were doing. What he saw made him stop moving. The humans were ahead of schedule. They had advanced nearly 500 meters and were still pushing forward. Their casualty reports showed 12 wounded, none dead. This should have been impossible. Tail opened a communication channel to the human frequency. What he heard changed everything he thought he knew about war. Screaming, cursing, heavy breathing, the sounds of absolute terror. Contact left, contact left. Move your team now. Grenade out, everybody down. I can't see them, they're everywhere. Focus on me, breathe. The voices were ragged with fear. Tail could hear their hearts pounding through the communication channel. These soldiers were terrified. Every single one of them was experiencing the kind of primal fear that should have shut down their ability to function. And yet they were still fighting, still advancing, still winning. "Commander," Tail said over the channel, "your soldiers appear to be in distress." "We're fine." Her voice was tight, controlled, but he could hear the fear underneath. "Just keep pushing on your end. We'll meet you in the middle." Fine? They were not fine. Tail had seen species break under far less pressure. They had legendary warriors who had frozen in place when the fear became too much. The beings of living crystal had shattered themselves rather than face certain death. Fear was the great equalizer. It turned warriors into victims. But not these humans. Tail pushed forward with his troops, but he kept one eye on the human channel. He needed to understand what was happening. The humans fought like no species he had ever seen. They used their fear. When a soldier froze, the others did not leave them behind. They grabbed them, shook them, screamed at them until they started moving again. When someone fell, two more rushed forward to drag them to safety, even as plasma fire and shadow tendrils filled the air around them. A young human named was pinned down behind a collapsed support beam. 3 hollow manifestations were closing in on his position. Tail watched through the tactical display, expecting the boy to run or freeze or die. Did none of these things. The young soldier's vital signs were off the charts. His heart was beating so fast it should have caused damage. His stress hormones had flooded his entire system. Every single part of his biology was screaming at him to flee. Instead, stood up. He walked toward the hollow manifestations, not running, walking. His rifle was raised, firing in controlled bursts that scattered the shadow creatures. When they reformed and lunged at him, he did not flinch. He kept firing. "What is he doing?" asked, watching the same display. "This is suicide." It should have been, but reached a junction box on the wall, tore off the cover, and redirected the station's emergency power through the corridor. The resulting electrical surge disrupted all 3 hollow manifestations long enough for his squad to advance and secure the area. Collapsed against the wall afterward, shaking so badly he could not stand. A medic named rushed to his side, checking his vitals, whispering words of comfort. But even as he shook, even as tears streamed down his face, was reloading his weapon. "I'm okay," he said, his voice cracked. "I'm okay, I can keep going." Tail felt something strange in his chest, a sensation he did not recognize. The battle continued for hours. They performed flawlessly as always. They took ground, eliminated threats, followed orders. They did everything they were supposed to do. But it was the humans who made the difference. When a hollow swarm threatened to overwhelm a critical junction, it was a human squad led by a sergeant named who held the line. They were outnumbered 10 to 1. They were bleeding, exhausted, and terrified beyond measure. They held anyway. When the warriors began to falter, it was who them. He stood in front of the soldiers, this tiny human man, and shouted at them until they found their courage again. "You want to live forever," screamed. "Then fight like you want to die today. The hollow can't take what you don't give them." It made no logical sense, but they responded. They pushed forward with renewed energy, following this small, terrified human into the darkness. By the end of the first day, the combined forces had secured 30% of the station. Casualties were high but acceptable. The mission was on schedule. Tail found Commander in the temporary command post that had been set up in a cleared section of the station. She was studying tactical displays, issuing orders, coordinating resupply efforts. She looked exhausted. Her hands were shaking slightly. "Your soldiers performed beyond expectations," Tail said. Looked up at him with red-rimmed eyes. "We lost 4 people today. Sergeant Bora, Private, Corporal, Specialist Minu." She recited the names like a prayer. "They were scared every second of every fight, and they died anyway because they refused to stop fighting." "I do not understand," Tail admitted. Fear is supposed to make creatures flee. It is a survival mechanism. For most species, yes, turn back to her displays. But humans are different. Fear doesn't just make us want to run, it also makes us want to protect, to fight, to sacrifice. She paused. It's not that we don't feel fear, Commander, it's that we've learned to use it as fuel. Tail stood there for a long moment, processing her words. In all his years of warfare, he had never considered that fear could be anything other than a weakness. His species had evolved beyond it, and he had always believed this made them superior. Now he was not so sure. By the fourth day of the siege, Tail had stopped trying to understand humans. He had decided to simply watch them instead. What he witnessed made no sense. It broke every rule of combat psychology that he had learned in 200 years of warfare. It violated the basic principles of survival that governed all intelligent life in the galaxy. The humans were getting more afraid, not less, and they were fighting harder because of it. Tail stood at an observation point overlooking a corridor where a human was engaged with a hollow cluster. The team leader was a woman named, barely 25 years old by human counting. She had been fighting for 4 days straight with only brief periods of rest. Her face was pale. Her movements were slightly slower than they had been on the first day. She was running on nothing but willpower and stimulant injections. A hollow tendril shot out from the darkness and caught one of her soldiers across the chest. The man, whose name was, flew backward and hit the wall hard. He did not get up. Scream echoed through the corridor. It was not a battle cry. It was grief, pure, raw, terrible grief. Then something happened that Tail would remember for the rest of his very long life. Charged. She ran directly at the hollow cluster, firing her weapon with one hand and throwing grenades with the other. Tears were streaming down her face. Her vital signs showed that she was experiencing the most intense fear response possible for a human body. Her system was flooded with so much adrenaline that it should have caused organ damage. She did not slow down. The other soldiers in her team hesitated for half a second. Then they followed her. For someone shouted, the cry was picked up by others. For they hit the hollow cluster like a wave of fury. Plasma fire lit up the corridor. Grenades exploded. The humans moved through the shadow creatures like they were not even there, destroying manifestations faster than they could reform. When it was over, was on her knees beside body. She was sobbing. Her weapon hung forgotten at her side. The medic appeared beside her. Look at me. He's gone. His voice was broken. He's gone. I know, put her hands on shoulders, but we're not, and we need to keep moving. Looked up at her fellow soldier. For a moment, Tail thought she might refuse. He thought the grief might finally be too much. Then wiped her eyes, picked up her weapon and stood. Form up, she said. Her voice was steady now, though her hands still shook. We have a mission to complete. Tail turned away from the observation point. He found standing behind him. You saw? Tail asked. I saw. His voice was strange, uncertain. Commander, what are these creatures? They are humans. I know what they are called. But what are they? I have fought beside the who feel fear but manage it through hive mind discipline. I have fought beside the who feel fear but suppress it through crystalline meditation. I have never seen any species feel fear this intensely and continue to function. Tail had no answer. That night he sought out Commander. He found her in the medical bay, sitting beside a wounded soldier. The soldier was young, perhaps 18 or 19 years old. Her name was, and she had lost her left leg to a hollow attack earlier that day. Commander, Tail said, may I speak with you? Looked up, she had been holding his hand. Of course, I'll be right back. Take your time, Commander. His voice was weak but calm. I'm not going anywhere. She smiled at her own joke. Tail followed to a quiet corner of the medical bay. Around them, human doctors and medics worked on the wounded. The sounds of pain and healing filled the air. You have a question, said. It was not a question itself. Many questions, but one in particular. Tail paused, gathering his thoughts. Your soldiers are terrified. Every moment of every battle they experience fear that would cripple most species. And yet they continue to fight. They continue to advance. They continue to win. Yes. Hell was quiet for a moment. She looked around the medical bay at her wounded soldiers. Some were sleeping. Some were crying. Some were already asking when they could return to the fight. Do you know the history of my species, Commander? Basic information only. You evolved on a high-gravity planet with predators larger and faster than yourselves. You developed intelligence as a survival mechanism. That's the simple version, leaned against the wall. The truth is messier. We were never the biggest or the fastest or the strongest. Everything on our planet could kill us. The weather, the animals, the diseases, even each other. We should have died out 1,000,000 times over. But you did not. No, we did not. Eyes found his. Because somewhere along the way, we learned something that no other species seems to have learned. We learned that fear is not the opposite of courage. Fear is the source of courage. Tail did not understand. He said so. Think about it, continued. A being that feels no fear takes risks because it does not understand the danger. That is not courage. That is ignorance. But a being that feels fear, that understands exactly what it might lose and chooses to act anyway. She smiled, though there was sadness in it. That is something else entirely. You believe fear makes you stronger. I believe fear makes us human, straightened up. My soldiers are not brave because they feel no fear. They are brave because they feel all of it, every terrible moment, and they refuse to let it stop them. They fight for each other. They fight for the people back home who will never know their names. They fight because someone has to, and they have decided that someone will be them. Tail processed this information. It went against everything his species believed about combat psychology. They had spent trying to eliminate fear from their biology, believing it to be a weakness. What if they had been wrong? I must return to my soldiers, said. Was there anything else? No, Tail paused. Yes, one thing. What? Your species is remarkable, Commander. I have fought beside 17 different species across 3 galactic arms. I have never witnessed anything like your people. Smiled. It was tired and sad and somehow still warm. We're just humans, Commander, scared little humans in a very big universe. She turned to walk away, then stopped. But we're still here, and we're not going anywhere. She returned to his bedside, leaving Tail alone with his thoughts. That night, for the first time in his 200 years of life, Commander Tail dreamed. He dreamed of shadows and darkness, and a cold feeling in his chest that he could not name. When he woke, his hands were shaking. He did not know what it meant, but he suspected the humans would. On the 7th day, the Hollow changed their strategy. They had been fighting defensively until now, reacting to the Allied advance rather than initiating attacks. Tail had assumed this meant they were weak, that the siege was working. He was wrong. The Hollow had been studying them, learning, adapting. At midnight, station time, every rift on Nexus 7 pulsed with dark energy. New Hollow manifestations poured into the station by the thousands, but they did not spread out evenly across the battlefield. They all went for the humans. Tail watched the tactical display in horror as the western sector turned black with enemy contacts. The human position was being overwhelmed. 300 soldiers against what looked like 5,000 Hollow manifestations, with more arriving every second. They are targeting the humans specifically, said. Why? Tail understood instantly. Because the Hollow can sense fear, they think it means weakness. They think the humans will break first. Will they? Tail did not answer. He was already running toward the western sector. The scene that greeted him was chaos. The humans had fallen back to a defensive position around a large cargo bay. They had set up barricades using crates and debris. Plasma fire streaked through the air in continuous streams. The noise was deafening. And everywhere there was fear. Tail could not sense emotions the way the hollow could, but he could see it in the humans' faces. He could hear it in their voices. He could smell it in their sweat. These soldiers were more afraid than any living creatures he had ever encountered. They were also not retreating, not even one step. Commander stood at the center of the defensive line, directing her troops with a voice that cracked and shook but never stopped. Was beside her, his left arm in a makeshift sling from a wound he had taken 2 days ago. He was firing a rifle one-handed, his shots finding targets with impossible accuracy. Tail shouted when she saw him. "What are you doing here, your sector?" "My sector is secure. I brought reinforcements." Tail gestured, and 50 shock troops moved into position alongside the humans. "The Hollow are trying to break you. They will not succeed." Stared at him for a moment. Then she laughed. It was a strange sound, half sob and half genuine amusement. "Thank you, Commander." "Do not thank me yet. We still have to survive the night." The battle that followed was the worst Tail had ever experienced. The Hollow came in waves, endless waves of shadow and hunger. They crawled over the barricades. They seeped through cracks in the walls. They materialized from patches of darkness that should have been too small to hide anything. The humans died. One by one, 2 by 2, they fell. A soldier named was pulled into a rift before anyone could reach him. A woman named was torn apart by 3 manifestations at once. A young medic named died trying to save a patient who was already gone. But for every human that fell, the others fought harder. Tail watched a soldier named take a wound that should have killed him instantly. A hollow tendril had pierced his chest, missing his heart by centimeters. By all rights, he should have collapsed, should have died. Instead, grabbed the tendril with both hands, held it in place, and shouted for his to fire. Shoot it now." They hesitated. Shooting the manifestation would mean shooting through. The plasma fire would kill him as surely as the hollow would. "That's an order," screamed. Blood was pouring from his wound. His face was white. His eyes were wild with pain and fear and something else, something that looked almost like joy. Do it now." Sergeant made the call. She raised her weapon and fired. The shot tore through the hollow manifestation and through shoulder, spinning him around and dropping him to the ground. But the manifestation was destroyed and was still breathing. Medic screamed, "Get over here." The medic appeared from somewhere in the chaos. She was covered in blood, some hers, most belonging to others. Her hands moved with practiced speed as she worked on wounds. "You're insane," said as she worked. "Completely insane." Grinned through the pain. "Had to be done." "You could have died." "But I didn't," he coughed blood. "And the line held, that's what matters." Tail felt that strange sensation in his chest again. That cold, twisting feeling that he still could not name. He had watched countless soldiers die in countless battles. He had never felt anything about it before. Death was simply part of war. But watching these humans, these small and fragile and terrified humans, sacrifice themselves for each other, it made him feel something. The battle continued through the night. By dawn, the hollow assault had finally weakened. The rift stopped producing new manifestations. The shadow creatures began to withdraw, retreating into the darker sections of the station. The humans had held. Tail surveyed the aftermath. Of the 300 human soldiers who had started the siege, fewer than 100 remained combat-capable. The cargo bay was littered with bodies, both human and. The walls were scorched black from plasma fire. The air smelled of blood and ozone and fear. He found Commander sitting against a barricade. She was covered in dust and blood. Her rifle lay across her lap, still warm from firing. Her eyes were closed. For a terrible moment, Tail thought she was dead. Then her eyes opened. They were red from crying but sharp and aware. "Commander," Tail said, "you should rest." Rest laughed bitterly. Do you know what I see when I close my eyes, Tail? I see their faces, all of them, every soldier I've lost in this war. They're waiting for me. The dead cannot wait for anything. They are simply dead. Maybe for your species, climbed to her feet using her rifle as a support. For humans, the dead never really leave us. We carry them with us always. Their voices, their faces, their hopes and dreams that will never be fulfilled. She looked at him with eyes that had seen too much. That's part of our fear, too. Not just fear of dying ourselves. Fear of failing the ones who already have. Tail did not know how to respond to this. His species did not mourn their dead. Death was simply the end of function. The idea that the dead could continue to affect the living was strange and unsettling. You fought well tonight, he finally said. We survived tonight, started walking toward the medical area. That's not the same thing. She paused and looked back at him. But thank you for coming to help us, Commander. It meant something. It meant a lot. She walked away, leaving Tail alone among the dead. He looked down at his hands. They were still shaking. He finally understood what the feeling in his chest was. He had read about it in xenobiology texts, had seen it in other species, had always dismissed it as weakness. It was fear. For the first time in his very long life, Commander Tail of the fleet was afraid. And he had the humans to thank for teaching him how. The final assault on the Hollow Rift generator began on the 9th day. Tail stood at the front of the combined forces, looking out at the last stretch of corridor that separated them from victory. Beyond those walls was the heart of the Hollow infestation, a massive rift that connected Nexus 7 to whatever nightmare dimension the shadow creatures called home. Destroy the rift, and the Hollow would lose their foothold in this sector of space. Simple, except that between them and the rift stood approximately 3,000 Hollow manifestations, the last and strongest of the enemy forces. The plan is straightforward, Tail said to the assembled commanders. Shock troops will lead the advance and create an opening. Warriors will hold the flanks. Crystalline soldiers will provide suppressive fire. Delphine specialists will handle any environmental hazards. He paused, looking at Commander. She was pale and exhausted. She had not slept more than 2 hours at a time since the siege began. The soldiers behind her looked even worse, dirty, bloody, bandaged, broken in 100 different ways. And yet their eyes were clear, alert, ready. The humans will hold the center, Tail continued. They will be the tip of our spear. Several officers shifted uncomfortably, spoke up. Commander, with respect, the humans have suffered the highest casualties of any force. Perhaps they should take a support role. No, his voice cut through the objection. We'll take the center. Commander said, your forces are depleted. Your soldiers are exhausted. Tactically, it makes no sense to. I said no, stepped forward. She was so much smaller than, but somehow she seemed to fill the entire room. My people have bled for this station. We've died for it. We're not sitting in the back while someone else finishes the job. Looked at Tail, expecting him to override the human commander. Tail did not. The humans will take the center, Tail said. All forces prepare to move in 1 hour. When the briefing ended, approached Tail privately. Thank you for backing me up, she said. I did not do it as a favor. Tail met her eyes. I did it because it was the right tactical decision. Your soldiers have something that none of my troops possess, something that cannot be trained or engineered. What's that? Heart, Tail paused, searching for the right words. My soldiers do not fear death. They face it with cold efficiency. But your soldiers, they fear death more than anything, and they face it anyway. That is something the Hollow have never encountered before. It confuses them. It scares them. Blinked, you think the Hollow are scared of us. I think they do not understand you. They sense your fear and expect you to break. When you do not break, when you keep fighting despite everything, it disrupts their strategy. They do not know how to respond to creatures who are terrified and courageous at the same time. For a long moment was silent, then she laughed softly. All this time, I thought our fear was our greatest weakness. Maybe it's actually our greatest weapon. 1 hour later, the final assault began. Tail led the charge, his shock troops smashing into the hollow defensive line with all the force they could muster. They opened a gap in the enemy formation, creating a corridor toward the rift. Then the humans poured through. Commander was at the front, as she had been in every battle. Was at her side, his wounded arm somehow still functional. Behind them came the survivors, and the others whose names Tail had learned over 9 days of blood and fire. They were not a large force, fewer than 100 soldiers, many of them wounded, all of them exhausted beyond measure. But they moved like a single organism. They covered each other without conscious thought. They knew each other's movements so well that they anticipated attacks before they happened. When one fell, the others closed ranks without hesitation. And they were screaming. Not screams of fear, though fear was certainly present. These were war cries, ancient and primal, dredged up from somewhere deep in human evolutionary history. The sound echoed through the corridor, mixing with the howl of plasma fire and the hiss of hollow manifestations. The hollow tried to stop them. They threw everything they had at the human advance: tendrils, shadow blades, concentrated bursts of void energy. They killed humans. They wounded more. They did everything they were designed to do. It was not enough. Tail watched Commander reach the rift generator. She was bleeding from a wound on her forehead. Her left hand was burned badly enough that she could barely grip her weapon. Her vital signs showed that she was running on pure adrenaline and willpower. She planted the demolition charges herself. "Everyone back," she screamed. Get clear now." The humans retreated in good order, covering each other as they. Tail's forces provided additional suppressive fire, keeping the hollow at bay. When the charges detonated, the rift generator exploded in a cascade of energy that lit up the entire station. The rifts throughout Nexus 7 collapsed simultaneously, cutting off the hollow from their source of reinforcement. The shadow creatures that remained began to dissolve, their connection to their home dimension severed. It was over. Tail found Commander in the aftermath. She was sitting on a pile of rubble, surrounded by her surviving soldiers. They were crying, laughing, holding each other. Some had collapsed from exhaustion. Others were simply staring at nothing, unable to process that they had actually survived. He approached slowly, not wanting to intrude on their moment. Saw him and smiled. It was the most genuine smile he had ever seen on a human face. "We did it," she said. "You did it." Tail sat down beside her, ignoring the debris that dug into his armor. "I have fought beside 17 species across 3 galactic arms. I have seen victories and defeats beyond counting. I have never witnessed anything like what your people accomplished here. We just did what we always do," looked at her soldiers. "We survived." "No," Tail shook his head slowly. "You did more than survive. You showed me something I never thought I would understand." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "My people cannot feel fear. We thought this made us superior. We believed that fear was a weakness, an evolutionary flaw to be eliminated. And now I know we were wrong." Tail looked at his hands. They had stopped shaking, but he remembered how it felt. Fear is not weakness. Fear is awareness. It is understanding what you might lose. And courage, true courage, is feeling that fear and choosing to act anyway. He turned to face her directly. "Your soldiers taught me what it means to be brave. Not the absence of fear, but the mastery of it. They felt everything, the terror, the grief, the pain, and they kept fighting. Not because they did not care about dying, because they cared about something more than their own survival." His eyes were wet, but she was still smiling. "That's the most human thing I've ever heard an alien say." "Perhaps your humanity is contagious." Tail allowed himself a small expression that might have been a smile. I felt fear for the first time during this battle. It was uncomfortable, unpleasant, and somehow also clarifying. Yeah, nodded. That's exactly what it's like. They sat in silence for a while, surrounded by the sounds of victory, the cheering of survivors, the hum of emergency systems coming back online, the distant rumble of rescue ships approaching. Finally, Tail stood. I must file my report to the Galactic Council, he said. I will recommend that human forces be assigned to every major engagement going forward. Looked up at him in surprise. That's a significant recommendation. It is accurate. Tail looked out over the ruins of the battlefield. The galaxy has many strong species, many intelligent species, many technologically advanced species, but humanity offers something unique, a perspective that the rest of us have lost or never had. You remind us what it means to truly fight for something. He began to walk away, then paused and looked back. Thank you, Commander, for everything you have taught me. Stood, wincing slightly from her injuries. She offered her hand in the human gesture of respect. Thank you for fighting beside us, Commander Tail. It meant everything. Tail took her hand. It was so small in his massive grip, so fragile. And yet somehow, stronger than anything he had ever held. His report to the Galactic Council was brief but clear. It described the siege of Nexus 7 in factual terms. It listed casualties, objectives achieved, resources expended. But it ended with a paragraph that would be quoted in military academies across the galaxy for centuries to come. In my 200 years of service, I have never encountered a species like humanity. They are small, fragile, and short-lived. They feel fear more intensely than any other species I have observed. By all logical measures, they should be among the weakest warriors in the galaxy. They are not. Humanity's fear is not their weakness. It is their strength. They have learned to transform terror into determination, grief into fury, and desperation into courage. They fight not because they do not understand death, but because they understand it completely and refuse to surrender to it. I recommend that human forces be integrated into all major military operations, not because they are the strongest, not because they are the most advanced, but because they are brave in a way that no other species can match. They taught me what courage truly means. I believe they can teach the rest of the galaxy as well. The recommendation was approved unanimously. And across the stars, species that had never known fear began to learn what it meant to fight beside humanity.